We've often suspected that an England second team might be the second best team in the Women's Six Nations, and we might now find out if that's true.
I thought that Pollock was really unlucky. I thought the penalty should have gone the other way.
On paper, at least, you would say they've had a very favourable run. I think it has opened up for them in the knockout stages. And so actually, is this the year that Leinster are going to all of a sudden finally win the Champions Cup again? Hello, this is The Ruck, the journalists' rugby podcast from The Times and The Sunday Times. Welcome along, I'm Alfie Reynolds, and in studio with me this week, I've got Elgin Alderman. Good morning, Elgin.
Good morning, Alfie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you? How was your weekend? Busy weekend?
Busy weekend, yes. Friday night celebrating the Great Britain women's rugby pioneers, 40 years from their first ever test down at Richmond. That was a fun evening. And then to Twickenham Allianz Stadium for the opening game of the Women's Six Nations. We'll talk about the difference between that as an occasion and as a high-performance sporting performance later on. And then straight after that, down to Reigate to compare a choir concert. So it was a full-on Saturday for me.
I always enjoy asking you what you got up to over the weekend because it's always quite an eclectic mix of things, isn't it? As you say, we will get on to the Women's Six Nations. That's coming up. Wins for England, for Scotland and for France. But we're going to focus our attention on the Champions Cup and the quarterfinals to start with. And also alongside us, it's Charlie Morgan. All right, Charlie?
Hello, pal.
You had the delight, I would imagine it was, of the wreck Friday night and I think was an instant Champions Cup classic.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, it was a game to really get lost in, a game that had a lot of hype surrounding it and absolutely delivered on all of that. A bit stressful to write an on-the-whistle report for, but yeah, just extremely enjoyable for loads of different facets. Two different sides with kind of different personas, I would say. They're both quite rounded and can play in different ways, but just brilliant game.
Best game of the weekend for both of you in the Champions Cup. Obviously, the Bath Northampton was amazing, high-scoring affair on Friday. Glasgow Toulon, very tight and an unexpected away win. Leinster Sale, as we expected, was pretty one-sided. And then Bordeaux Toulouse, just quality. The atmosphere looked incredible. So much of what we would have expected from that fixture. So best game of the weekend for each of you.
I think there's a case for either the All-French or the All-England 1v2 game. But I think any game that has both teams scoring more than 40 points got a comeback victory on a Friday night. I think it's got to be Bath Northampton. Yeah,
I'll go that. I'm biased for being there. There was so much quality, though, obviously, and as we'd expect in Bordeaux Toulouse too, and that felt more test matchy, I would say. Maybe hinging a little bit on those cards that Toulouse suffered. Shout out as well in the Challenge Cup for Exeter going to Benetton and winning. That's a really big result, and that was. I sort of somehow caught a bit of that accidentally on my phone. It was one of those where you sort of check the score and then actually stay with it for sort of the majority of it, and it was great. Exeter really building something special.
As you were talking there, Charlie, Elgin and I exchanged a little wink because I knew that if we're mentioning the Challenge Cup, there's no way that Elgin's going to let us get away with not mentioning
the mighty Dragons winning in Zebra 35-32 after winning in Paris 36-31, a fourth semi-final in the Challenge Cup for the Dragons. Stand up for the men of Gwent. Come on, let's go.
As I was messaging you both over the weekend of what do you want to cover, any big talking points, and Elgin straight away said the Dragons getting into the Challenge Cup semi-final. So look, you've got your mention early on in the pod as well.
Yeah, all jokes aside, for so long Dragons have been the most unfashionable Welsh region. They have shown some signs of recovery this year. So for those travelling fans, there was a great picture of all the fans that went out to Paris for that Stade Francais game. You know, it's one of the longest suffering fan bases in professional rugby. So to have those moments of joy, two great away wins, it'll be another occasion against Montpellier away in the semi-final. That'll be a great thing for the region. And
for Welsh rugby as well. I suppose, there hasn't been much in terms of green shoots, has there? So a run in the Challenge Cup. It's the funny thing with the Challenge Cup, isn't it? Because let's be honest, we don't cover it much at all, generally speaking, once you get to the semi-finals and finals. But a team like the Dragons are probably exactly who the Challenge Cup is actually really good for. Yeah, I think I probably mention it every few weeks about how a new competition does give teams a new lease of life, an opportunity to park a series of bad results and find some joy in the season. We've seen Northampton do that, for example, in Europe before. It's not the first time the Dragons have done this. Like I say, I think it's the first time in 10 years, and it was Montpellier the last time as well that they faced in the semi-finals. So basically, it's the first time in 10 years that the Dragons have had a series of knockout wins and have something to celebrate where there's jeopardy on the line every game.
Who's having a good season for them? Who've been the stars of these last couple of big games?
There have been a few good overseas players like Fine and Isi in the backs. Rio Dyer sort of fallen out of favour with Wales. He's always, doing really well for Dragons. some other long-standing local boys in the forwards as well, like Harrison Keddy, these guys that have just been, ploughing away in a team that loses a lot of rugby matches, but also someone in the Wales team like Aaron Wainwright as well, who's playing international rugby and losing a lot of rugby matches. That's why for these guys, it is just a great opportunity for them to get over the line and actually celebrate some success on the rugby field.
Well, there you go. Dragons get their mention. If I bring us back onto the Champions Cup, and something you just mentioned, actually, Charlie, about the Bordeaux Toulouse feeling a bit more like a test match compared with Bath Northampton. That was one of the things that stood out to me, of the contrast in styles between the high-scoring all-English affair. Actually, defence for a couple of those tries, I think, was a little bit soft and not that great in comparison with the all-French game, where it was much tighter. It felt like more of a test match. That was probably something that stood out to me on the weekend between those games.
Yeah, I don't know whether there was something in... I mean, first of all, we should say that there are test matches these days that are like that. We were at one at Stade de France, weren't we? Where it's helter-skelter and it feels like it's going to come down to the last play even, and who scores last, like a sort of basketball affair. I would say that maybe the Toulouse-Bordeaux game it felt a bit tenser because of how much jeopardy there was on that game. That felt like a final, and I felt like that their sides were, as much as they'll say, we're now onto this. I know Maxime Lucu's spoken about, onto the next one, and has given a load of respect to Bath, as they will do. But it really felt like whoever won that and came through now sort of big tournament favourites, you would say, and that was always likely to be the case, whoever won out of those two sides. Big bodies, so it felt like more like a test match. Sort of a lot of Bordeaux's defence in the first quarter was just fearsome because Toulouse just threw everything at them. And maybe a little bit more craft about the kicking game, and that felt a little bit more influential as well. But certainly, two contrasting but compelling games.
The Bath Northampton game, it acquired its own myth by half-time because, 35-26 at half-time. I was at the Richmond Athletic Ground for that 40-year anniversary, so I missed the bonkers first half and saw the slightly more sedate second half on the way home. But come Saturday, more than one person came up to me and said, "Do you see that game last night? I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to getting home to watching the highlights later." People waxing lyrical about, was it Archie McParland's sort of one-handed flick on? Was it him in midfield doing the run around? So it had people that are maybe not necessarily dyed-in-the-wall, Prem rugby watchers going, "Have you heard about that game? I can't wait to go back and watch that when I get home."
It was a real kind of exhibition of, I thought, excellent coaching, and you're right to say that some of the defence was pretty soft. Ollie Slightholme's try, that was Ollie Slightholme is deceptively powerful, but I think he brushed off four players on what was a kind of route one strike, which Bath will be pretty disappointed with.
Did Tom Dunn have a tap and go from five as well, where he tapped and go, went straight over, that you look at and you think
looked a little bit easy, and there were little bits of Phil Dowson was shout out to our colleague Dan Schofield here. Phil Dowson came in and his demeanour in the post-match was almost disarmingly buoyant, and somebody asked him about the Pollock penalty, which we might get onto later. That was obviously a pretty contentious way to shape that last 5 minutes. I'm not sure whether it absolutely decided the game, but certainly shaped the game at the end. But Phil Dowson was asked by Scoey, is it any sort of consolation that game was actually phenomenal? And Dowson just went, "No, mate. It really wasn't. I'd have rather lost by 40. So, and then we thought he might have been joking. He went, "Genuinely." So it was kind of like it was, but it was a sort of, I thought it just showed Van Graan was, as always, spoke really well, and actually said, I actually wasn't too flustered throughout that game. So when Northampton were 35-14 and 28-7 earlier, sort of up in that first half, and it looked like they were just running amok with some really clever stuff. There's a real Bath. The Baths as a side, how they tactically go about games now, loading their bench, and how they come on strong in the last quarter of games, and actually just in the 10 minutes before half time as well. They're really attuned with their supporters. It's really interesting. So there's almost a sense of calm about the supporters as well.
Because they've seen it before.
They've seen it before. I was at the game against Exeter earlier this season where it followed a really similar pattern, and they didn't lead on Friday till that decisive try from Ted Hill. But the players just exude this confidence and conviction that they're going to come on strong at the end of the game, and that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I wondered whether for a lot of that game, whether we were seeing the importance of European experience in that Northampton just came out the blocks so fast, and I was thinking, is this because this is a Northampton team that have gone deep in Europe previously, that got to last year's final, that understand how to win on the road in these away games? But then, as you say, the quality of that Bath bench, a lot of credit to Bath really, and to be down by those sorts of deficits in that sort of game, no panic, the bench comes on, it has an impact, and you win it late on.
Totally. I actually thought, that was exactly my thought before the game, that Saints they'd won at the Rec 3 days after Christmas in a really, with a rotated side, in a game that felt like a lot of what happened on Friday, but they've had this run since going over 3 seasons without a win in the Champions Cup. They've had this run where they've gone semi-final, now quarter-final, and they've won at
semi-final, quarter.
They were going for a third consecutive semi-final, which is the first time that a Prem side would have done it since Saracens in that golden period for them, and they've won at Thomond Park, lost at Sversfeld, in Pau as well, and obviously in the Viva Stadium, and they looked really comfortable with the occasion, and they looked like they knew they needed to start fast and did so. So as I say, for Bath to stay calm, weather that storm, absorb all those punches and come back through, good stuff.
Let's come on to the Henry Pollock yellow in just a second, but one thing I think this game has totally whet the appetite, hasn't it, for the potential of this being a Twickenham rematch. I know if you're a fan of Exeter or Leicester, or a Bristol fan hoping they get themselves into the top 4, you'd be hoping for a different final. But if you're a neutral in this, you must be looking at that thinking, I hope that is the Prem final at Twickenham.
Yeah, I sort of teed it up accidentally before, in last week's podcast, saying how the beauty of these one nation clashes is that it does create the possibility of a revenge narrative later on in a slightly different tournament. We've seen how Bordeaux and Toulouse can go toe to toe in different competitions, and the result can switch between there. So yeah, I think plenty of neutrals would be looking forward to a Bath Northampton final were that to happen.
Do you think privately Northampton will be thinking, maybe not saying, but might be thinking, we've got them here, lads. We get them at a neutral venue in a final, and we'll turn them over. We've beaten them once already at the Rec. We should have won in a quarter-final Friday night at the Rec, and look, it was a great game. We'll come on to the yellow now, as I say, and things change games, and it slipped away late on. But do you think privately Northampton actually would be quite confident that if it came down to that showpiece event, they'd be able to get revenge on Bath?
100%. I think that same press session that I'm talking about, first of all, should apologise to George Furbank, because he came all the way across the pitch. Where the changing rooms are at the Rec versus where they do media. It's basically the full length of the pitch, and he arrived late, and then the session basically finished. So he'd done that whole length of the field for nothing. But as Fraser Dingwall left, one of the last questions was, you've got Bath again in 2 weeks. You've got Bath again, very soon. And he said 2 weeks and walked out. So they are very attuned to what they already refocused. It felt like they'd already refocused what their season has to be, which is an all-out assault on the Prem. And I feel like that game is actually before Bath's semi. So Bath will, you would think, rotate, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be a weak Bath team because they've got a very strong squad, but it'd be a chance for Saints to give themselves a bit of daylight at the top, secure a home semi-final, and then be all out, as I say, to win that title again.
Moments like that aren't huge, but it's nice when an athlete kind of acts like a fan, where they say, I know when we're playing Bath again, whereas we're so used to them saying, oh, focus on next week, whatever. I don't even know where we are in the table. It's nice when yeah, they know what's going on.
Saints are really good for that generally. Actually, their personalities really come across and you really see the sort of level of care that they have, especially with someone like Dingwall.
Look, okay, let's do the Pollock yellow card discussion. How do we want to attack this? I mean, in a sense, Charlie, is there far too much focus on this one incident, given that it was an 80 minutes of however many points, so many different things can go against you or go for you across that period, that when we really focus in on one decision, which wasn't even right at the end of the game, that it almost does, I think, a bit of a disservice to the game and to the officials and that sort of thing. But give me, you were there, give me your views on this incident.
I think you can think that, because I do think that Saints were going to have to absorb more pressure from Bath, and Bath's bench had all come on, and were looking like they were with a score down. They were very much. It felt like they had impetus in the game. I think you can think that. I think you can also think that it's a wrong and kind of pivotal decision.
I think it was the wrong decision, by the way. I'm not saying that. But...
No. I agree. And I think at the end of the Martin Johnson always. I just remember him giving an interview once where he was asked something about maybe a contentious decision. It might have been since he stopped playing, but he said, "Look, you get what you get a lot of the time in a rugby match, and especially one that chaotic when there's so many moments that could have swung how things went." But yeah, I agree that it would be dangerous to zero in so much, if just not from the point of view that it's these breakdown calls really aren't clear cut. I thought that Pollock was really unlucky. I thought the penalty should have gone the other way. But if you look at, I think it's Freeman that makes the tackle on Arundel. He's impeding the Bath clearers a little bit as he rolls back out.
So many moving parts.
It's difficult. I thought Andrew Brace could have potentially got more from his assistant referee on that side. And maybe, given what I'm talking about there with the moving parts, maybe the call is just play on and not. I thought it was punchy to go penalty advantage in the first instance and then to go yellow card. I thought that was really, really punchy. And then when you're thinking it's probably the wrong call as well, it's big. But yeah, how do you see it?
Permission to jump the gun on the TMO aspect of this.
Yeah, go on. Alfie. So I have seen people suggest that it's such a big decision so late in the game. Should the TMO come in there?
So my view on that is absolutely not, because my view on the TMO is that the sports that do it best, rugby league and cricket, TMO intervention is down to player challenge. And it's almost shifted the entire basis of how people view decisions. Because now in cricket, they go, oh, that's a terrible review, or they've wasted their reviews. And you almost don't think about the fact the umpire's involvement in that in the same way. The difficulty with rugby union and having a sort of captain's challenge is just what Charlie's alluded to there, and yourself, Alfie, where if you look at any breakdown, you could go, okay, well, his head's below his hip, so that's a free kick. But then those two are kind of off their feet, and he's a bit in at the side. So I do think it would be quite difficult to employ that because of how many things go on in these chaotic situations. But generally, my view is that I know it's late on in the game, but I don't want to see TMOs coming in to go, no, I think you've got that breakdown one wrong.
Yeah, I guess that the reason that I was kind of hesitant in how we tackle this topic is I feel like it is something in the game at the moment. It was something I was really conscious of at the last World Cup, and I think will be a big feature of the next World Cup. I think we continue to see it in the game all the time now with social media, of people on kind of grainy, wobbly videoing their TVs, highlighting individual decisions that, as we've outlined, there are so many things that you could call which don't get called, and really zoning in on these and zooming in, maybe is a better expression, on these individual decisions. I actually don't think we really get anywhere. And I think if the wider discussion is the standard of officiating, which I'm not saying should be the topic we're having, the discussion we're having off the back of this single incident, but then I could get on board with it more if it's a wider discussion. But I just think we're heading into and are in a dangerous position with, on social media, people go on and because their team had a decision go against them, they highlight it, and I just don't feel like it's all that productive in terms of the overall discussion. And I do think it was the wrong decision from Andrew Brace. I think the yellow card was harsh. I think the penalty should have gone the other way. But if you're Northampton, why don't we talk about, as we mentioned earlier, the Tom Dunn tap from the penalty 5 metres out where he then goes over straight away and scored. Like, you could speak about so many other areas of the game for why Northampton lost that. I don't think we particularly get anywhere when we're saying a team lost it because of that one officiating decision.
Yeah, there were as Dowson mentioned himself, there were loads of controllable aspects that sort of got away from Saints a little bit. And it's really interesting. So Henry Pollock is just going to be at the centre of this a lot because he goes hard at breakdowns. I think he's probably a little bit smarter than he is generally given credit for as well. So I think potentially over the course of his career, he will get to the point where he is subconsciously favoured by some referees because they go, actually, well, Henry Pollock's quite smart, so it will take a lot to penalise him. Does that make sense? You get a lot of sort of really crafty breakdown operators. Same with the scrum, actually, where you're thinking, well, they're legal a lot of the time, so maybe here it's a little bit grey, but no, let's go with him being legal. He was just before, so it's set up, what's the situation that set up the scrum from which Bath attacked for that Pollock yellow. He'd got back to rescue a situation when Finn Smith had thrown an intercept to Ollie Lawrence. He'd got back, he'd tackled and jackled, I think, and that looked 50-50, and Brace actually said he was legal and said it was only a knock-on, but when Brace initially blew up, I thought, that's a penalty and a yellow. So he got on the right side of that one, he got on the wrong side of the next one. I think over his career he will get on the right side more often, because I think, as I say, there will be this perception that he's actually smarter.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are times where we have to discuss officiating and all that sort of thing, but I think what I'm trying to say is it's about doing it in an intelligent way which is actually worth our time, whereas I fear a lot of the time with social media it just turns into like flinging accusations and things at officials, and it doesn't actually get us anywhere.
Having been lucky enough to sort of sit with refs while they do their review process, I cannot stress enough how thorough this is and how they are always thinking about different scenarios. They are really they think about things in quite a lateral way, and their standards are very, very high. They will be held accountable for these tiny sort of pivotal, yes, but very, very sort of dynamic moments by their peers, by sort of assessors. It is a thorough process.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of Bath then, if we maybe just shift it back onto the victors here, the question now, Elgin, can they beat Bordeaux? That is the next great challenge for this Bath side, isn't it?
It truly will be an absolutely mighty victory. It's Bath's first semi-final, is it, for 20 years, since Chris Malone was playing at fly half, I think it was. Again, was it Biarritz in that semi-final? So, look, it'll be a huge historic occasion for them. They've broken that domestic drought, and now they're looking to go that step beyond. So, you just know that will be a huge occasion. The game may not live up to the billing, but I suspect it will, because it's Bordeaux, playing in Bordeaux in front of probably 42,000 people. I'm sure lots of Bath fans will be looking to flock over there, because Bristol had 1,200 going to going to Toulouse when there was very little anticipation of victory. Same with Leicester going to Bordeaux. Bath are going to go there actually with hopes of doing what Harlequins did in even less likely in a less likely situation a few years ago at a slightly different stadium in Bordeaux. So it's teed up to be a brilliant domestic crunch fixture.
So Bath make the trip to take on Bordeaux. Great semi-final. Glasgow 19, Toulon 22. We were talking to Mark Palmer last week about, it felt like it was on for this Glasgow team. They've been going brilliantly in the URC. They'd gone brilliantly in the Champions Cup. And then all of a sudden, Toulon come to town. I mean, they're not doing that well in the top 14, are they, Elgin? It's a pretty massive shock, isn't it?
I mean, the middle of the top 14 is very tight. So they're not that far away from the business end, but they are in the bottom 5 of the top 14. So they're not having a great season, certainly not as great as last year. But then you just look at the names they've got in the team. They've got Baptiste Serrin, they've got Charles Olivon. These are top class international players. They've also got just, it's one of these old the DNA of a club situation. They are obviously a club that has won this tournament before. They recognise the importance of it, etc. So they were never going to be that easy to beat, but I still think it's a real missed opportunity for Glasgow, isn't it?
Dréant on the right wing has been one of the form players in Europe for me. So that's obviously a huge thing to say, because he's not getting into the France side.
But he got called up to the squad, didn't he? Obviously, it's difficult to get in ahead of Bielbiere on one wing and Atisogbe on the other. But
so powerful.
He's got the recognition. Yeah.
Well balanced. He's an excellent player. I interviewed Ben White in the week in the lead up, and I think there was a sense that they were. Will Collier actually mentioned it, didn't he, a couple of weeks ago, where he said that because Toulon have sunk to where they've sunk to in the top 14, almost the focus happens for them, that this is their best chance of silverware. And yeah, with the pedigree there that Elg mentions. Glasgow were missing with a rude injuries. They just didn't really quite get going consistently enough over the course of the 80 minutes, and Toulon had big moments, put together some really nice multi-phase tries actually. But yeah, they get through. They get through to a semi.
How big of a missed opportunity for Glasgow though? Would have been home semi-final.
It's given the work they've done in the pool stage to earn that right to be in Scotland all the way through up to the semi. I think it will be really gutting, yeah.
And what about Leinster in the other quarterfinal, which, as we expected, Leinster 43, Sale 13, the most one-sided game, because Sale have had a tough season, haven't they? I mean, I suppose that the question really off the back of this game that I thought is, have you seen enough from Leinster to say that actually they could win the Champions Cup, because we haven't really been speaking about them in those terms, certainly not compared to other seasons. But when it worked well against Sale, it worked really well.
A few things here. I think it was something that Hugo Keenan said after they'd beaten Edinburgh in the last round. He said that actually that week or the 2 weeks building up to that was the first time that they had all their internationals back, which is mad. It was the beginning of April, and that was the first time that they'd had sort of everybody in the same room, is how Keenan put it. So they will naturally be building a bit of impetus, and it's natural probably to think that with the amount of players they had on the Lions tour, that this season would have been really difficult anyway. I don't think they've been totally convincing. They nearly lost at home to La Rochelle. Leicester made life sticky for them at Welford Road as well. But they've got so much quality there, and actually they're boxing clever as well with the injuries they've got. They've been decimated at Loosehead, for example. Sale did. I genuinely thought Sale. I know Barnsley's torn a strip off them in today in his piece, and saying that they sort of were very unimaginative when they went over there. But I did think that their best chance was always going to be aerial pressure, scrum pressure, and they applied a bit of that. And Leinster was still able to sort of get through a really difficult first half and pull away very convincingly and win by 30 points in bad conditions. And it's ironic, isn't it, that we have been sort of monitoring them, I guess, more closely in previous years, and they've fallen short. And this year, maybe when they've slipped a little bit away from the limelight, they look in a really strong position now, you would say, to make the final.
I thought exactly the same thing, in that for years coming into the Champions Cup, it was, are Leinster going to bottle it again? And they often sometimes did. Sometimes they just got beaten in classic games against very good opposition. But are Leinster going to win it? Are Leinster going to win it? Surely they have to. They're the favourites. Whereas this year, actually, that hasn't been the case at all. So ironically, is this going to be the year where, when we haven't been talking about Leinster, they're going to get themselves to a final? Let's be honest, their path to the final, particularly now that Glasgow have lost to Toulon, on paper at least, you would say they've had a very favourable run. I think it has opened up for them in the knockout stages. And so actually, is this the year that Leinster are going to all of a sudden finally win the Champions Cup again?
I think another element to it is we're so accustomed to seeing coaches and players almost manufacture beef. We saw it on the Lions tour with Curry and Byrne and Farrell, sort of saying, oh, no one thinks you should be here. I think a lot of people thought they should have been there. Same one with Bordeaux and the Pollock thing during the last final, where they mangled words that he didn't even say as a thing that, oh, he doesn't rate us, whatever. For Leinster, they can use the element that no one thinks we're going to win, and no one really wants us to win other than our own fans, because we are the bogeymen of this competition. So it's quite easy for them to get up for all these matches, because they might be sitting there thinking, everyone thinks we're always playing at the Aviva, everyone thinks we get lucky, and now everyone's talking about the two Bs, Bordeaux and Bath. So it'd be quite easy for them to manufacture plenty of gumption to go into these last two games, possibly.
Yeah, I'm all for players manufacturing beef and finding out about it. That's great. But yeah, I would say that they've earned this draw, right? Because they do so well. They are just so relentlessly consistent and dominant in the pool stages, and even with that flicker of potentially going to Glasgow in the semi, they've now lasted the course and lasted longer than Glasgow. So they've got this home-ish semi, and maybe it's a bit of karma for Ireland's brutal World Cup draw last time out. You could say that.
I'm not sure that they would. Most Ireland fans say we'd rather have the World Cup draw back, thanks, but maybe so. So in terms of those semi-finals, it's the first weekend in May. Leinster against Toulon on the Saturday, and Bordeaux against Bath on the Sunday. I wonder how many, as you say, Bath fans are going to be pouring over to France. What a great weekend that will be. We'll leave the Champions Cup there. Next up, we'll have a quick break. We'll come on to the Women's Six Nations, which got underway over the weekend. So, Women's Six Nations up and running over the weekend. Elgin, you were at Allianz Stadium, Twickenham. England 33, Ireland 12. England below their best, but it's the Red Roses. The winning machine keeps on winning.
Yeah, I think with all of these games at this stage of women's rugby, you've got to separate the off-field from the on-field, I think. Off-field, it was a championship record attendance. They had more than 77,000 people there, which wasn't quite as many as the 81,885 at the World Cup final, but it was still a huge attendance. First time they played in almost 7 months since that World Cup final, so it felt, very much like a homecoming, a huge occasion. Lovely sunny day for the most part. at the National Stadium. On the field, a lot of rust. They did not play well. Of the 34 wins in a row, I think it was probably in the worst 5 in terms of how they played. Lots of new combinations, lots of absences because of injury, because of 4 pregnancies just in the pack alone. So there's a lot to contend with, but they won again and they haven't lost since the 2022 World Cup final. So it continues the juggernaut, but there are some question marks over what might happen over the rest of this year, certainly.
Yeah, I'm interested in some of those question marks. I suppose if I was to push back at you, it would be to say that they didn't play that well, but they won 33-12. And also, you would expect England to continue to get better, wouldn't you, throughout each round of the Six Nations? You
would expect them to get better. The other thing at play, like we mentioned, is they're now basically going to be having their third choice lock pairing because they're already missing 3 through pregnancies, and then Morwenna Talling suffered what is expected to be a tournament-ending injury. Natasha Hunt as well, scrum half, another tournament-ending injury. So we've often suspected that an England second team might be the second best team in the Women's Six Nations, and we might now find out if that's true because there is going to be a third choice lock pairing. You're going to have uncapped players playing. You're going to have Lily Ives-Campion, who was the youngest member of the World Cup squad, being the leader of the second row and leading the line out. We've already had a 19-year-old Hani Alalatui make her debut in a position she doesn't normally play in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the back 5 of the pack. There's going to be an opportunity now for Flo Robinson, who's only got 1 cap, to probably come off the bench at scrum half now. We might see some rotation at 12, where Helena Rowland played this time around, but someone like Sarah Parry might make her debut in that position. So there'll be lots of opportunities for people to create depth, lots of opportunities for John Mitchell to look at a few new players and see what happens. And we'll just see. If they win a Grand Slam again with all these things going on, then it's just another statement of how far ahead of everyone they are.
Yeah, so there's a few things to unpack there, and I could go in 2 different directions. I suppose, first of all, are you saying that the Red Roses could be there to be got in this Six Nations?
I think, again, we're looking towards the final round against France in Bordeaux. I'd still, even with, let's say 19-year-old debutant Demelza Short in the second row, you'd still think that they've got more than enough to win certainly those first 4 games. And you'd still wouldn't suggest that they wouldn't be able to beat France either. France was slow to start against Italy again on the opening round, but they won 47. So it looks, after the opening round, like everyone is still where we thought they would be in the pecking order. I know I'm looking a long way ahead now, but a lot of these absences will still be the case come September and October, which is when the Red Roses might be playing Canada 3 times, home and away. WXV Global Series. They're welcoming the Black Ferns to Twickenham. So I think you're probably looking at those fixtures, as we alluded to on last week's pod, for the real tests where a lot of these absences will still be in play. I'd still fully expect England to be going to Bordeaux 4 from 4, 37 from 37, as it were. It'll just be interesting to see what the team looks like when we get there.
Yeah, so I suppose the other side of, if I've suggested, could England have a few weaknesses here because of the injuries and the debutants and all that sort of stuff, the other side of that is actually this is an England machine that just keeps on winning, plus they're blooding new players and getting more experience in them. And if you're everyone else, you're just looking at it thinking, what are we meant to do?
It's almost like a dream situation. I genuinely think we're at the point now where everybody, including that England coaching team, are hoping for more adversity and hoping for sort of more scenarios that are going to be difficult and awkward for the side, because otherwise they're really not learning much. I looked at, and I know it will change now with the injuries that had happened, but you looked at that side, the Red Roses side that was picked for that game against Ireland, and you thought, well, the continuity, even though everybody's talking about these pregnancies and these injuries, still a lot of continuity there, and that's still the guts of a World Cup winning side. So to throw a little bit more adversity, I think, is certainly a good thing in the long term for them.
I mentioned the off-field growth as well. Obviously, England are way ahead of everyone else in terms of attendances, but we're looking at Ireland. They're going to be playing at the Aviva for the first time. I think there's already more than 16,000 tickets sold. Their previous record is just under 8, so that's already going to be a huge one. England's next match is going to be a historic game at Murrayfield, already more than 25,000 sold for that one. So this tournament is guaranteed to be another step forward in terms of the attendances it can garner for these big matches. But even the fact that we're talking about 16 and 25,000 as being records for those countries, compared with England getting 77,000 at Twickenham, and an Ashton Gate where I think everything is sold out except for a few hospitality seats, etc. They're ahead of the game in that regard as well.
Yeah, as you say, or as you said, I think in your first answer, Elgin, there's almost the kind of the off-field stuff and then the on-field stuff here. The off-field stuff is brilliant. I was reading something over the weekend that 10 years ago the Red Roses were playing in front of a couple of thousand people, and now we're talking about them having 70-odd thousand in Twickenham off the back of the sold-out World Cup final. On the field, though, maybe too early to say. We've only seen one round, but is the gap being closed at all? Because I do look at it and I think, look, it's overwhelmingly positive. It is a brilliant place and an amazing place that the women's game has got itself to in a short space of time. But at some point, from a sporting point of view, you do need that gap to be closed. Is there any sign of that at the moment?
I mean, if you just look at the scoreboard, you'd have to say that yes, because 2 years ago, this England-Ireland fixture was 88-10 at Twickenham, and this time it was 33-12. I think it was the closest Ireland have been, I think it was for 10 years or so in terms of that scoreline. So in that regard, even though, yes, England were clearly rusty and not playing great, Ireland hadn't played in just the same amount of time. So you'd have to say there is an element there where the teams were a bit nearer. I think the other interesting thing you mentioned there is, what do fans of the women's game expect from sport compared to the men's game? Because I can fully understand why someone who isn't yet bought into the Women's Six Nations would think twice about doing so because England are going to win every time. I can understand that. If you're not a Red Roses fan, that's probably not the most appetising thing in the world. And yet the Red Roses does attract a huge crowd of people who actually just don't know what it's like to go and watch their team lose. So they almost don't want to turn up and think, oh, this could be a 48-46 humdinger, which it can be against France in these Women's Six Nations matches. It seems that they turn up thinking, I might get an autograph and a picture with Meg Jones, Ellie Kildunn, the two players that get the biggest cheers at the ground. It's a great day out, and I get to turn up and see the team I like watching win. So it's an interesting dichotomy about what fans of this growing version of rugby expect from a day out compared to maybe what the diehards who have been following rugby for 30, 40 years and think they want that J word, jeopardy, in everything they see. But I think if you said to a fan of the England men's rugby team, imagine if they'd won 34 games in a row, I think they'd probably think, yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'll tell you what was just a mad ending as well, actually. It was the Wales-Scotland game at the Principality. Wales looking like they might be about to go the length of the pitch to win it. At one point, Scotland thought the game was over, but then they came back for a TMO check on a high tackle. So it was a penalty to Wales, and then they messed up the resulting line-out. But for a moment, I thought that we were going to see like the most bonkers end to that game.
Yeah, and that occasion is a perfect example of where the ambition and the reality can be at loggerheads, because Wales have now started taking games to the Principality Stadium, which is obviously a great step. But the attendance there was only just over 10,000, and those people could have fit in Cardiff Arms Park, the same, next door to it. So it's this situation for the other nations where they've maybe got the ambition to rival what the Red Roses are doing, but they're just not there yet. Because for Wales, I mean, the results again, another narrow defeat. They really need to start turning some of these close defeats into victories. They had that, what we thought might have been a breakthrough season a few years ago, where they won 3 of their 5 games and then feels like they've gone backwards again. Sean Lynn hasn't yet been able to turn that around, so it was another narrow defeat. But yeah, that occasion was a prime example of where the reality doesn't quite yet meet the ambition for those other nations.
So this weekend in the Women's Six Nations, Scotland, England, Wales, France, Ireland, Italy. I'm guessing you're going to be at the Scotland game, Elgin, but what kind of stands out to you in all of those fixtures?
Yeah, I mean, it'll obviously be interesting to see how Wales can go against France and how France are tracking after that first game against Italy, just to see if, as we expect, they will be the ones that might be able to give England a real proper go. You look at what's been going on in the Under-18 Six Nations Festival recently. Not for the first time. France absolutely stuffed England. I think it was 75-7, the final scoreline. So for several years now in a row, France look like they've got some really good talent, better talent coming through than England. But when it gets to the top tier level, the Red Roses just have this ability to bring in people and turn it into an unbeatable machine. So again, we're looking to see what it'll be like in a few years' time. But for now, still very much the Red Roses and that occasion at Murrayfield. Yes, I will be there. It'll be another great occasion in terms of off the field growth. I think the biggest standalone women's sport fixture in Scotland in terms of attendance. So that's to look forward to, and also to see who England pick in the pack, because that'll be interesting to see as well.
Okay, good stuff. So Elgin's going to be covering the Red Roses. Charlie, for you, a return to Prem action this weekend?
Heading to Sandy Park to see Saints go up against Exeter. Obviously, very interesting if Northampton can dust themselves off after last Friday night with Exeter flying. That game was a high-scoring draw early in the season, so anything close to that would be very interesting.
33 all in round one, which actually, I was looking back, at half-time, Northampton were leading 33-7.
They were, and I think Exeter had a potential winner ruled out as well. So it was, a totally mad one. More please.
So more of the same. Well, good stuff. Thank you very much for listening. This has been The Ruck, the journalists' rugby podcast from The Times and The Sunday Times. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can do so. The email address is theruck@thetimes.co.uk. And then also a reminder that you can now watch the episodes as well. If you want to, head over to YouTube and find the Times Sport YouTube page. We'll be back with you next week.